Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 13th lecture in Dr. Tom's American Civil War series. So at this point, we've gotten subscribers up in number, and I hope that will continue to go up. So if you have not yet subscribed, if you could please do that. And of course, if you like this video, please feel free to tick the like icon at the end of it. So today we are focusing on another border South state, Delaware. Now, Delaware is a state that I would say has largely been neglected when it comes to the study of the American Civil War. And a lot of historians have really brushed over it very quickly and just barely skimming the surface. And I will just say, do so at your peril. Delaware actually plays a very crucial role in the Secession crisis, as well as in the very early stages of the American Civil War, as far as setting up the Northern war effort, and also having the South see what sort of hand they've been dealt by the end of the Secession crisis. Now, first of all, we need to talk about Delaware. What is it? Is it a southern state? Is it a northern state? Is it a border state? Well, it identified as a southern state. It always had. It looks like a southern state. I mean, look at it. A lot of the states very swampy. It looks no different from, South Carolina low country or Tidewater, Virginia, or, anywhere in the Louisiana bayou. And the state legislature was completely dominated by the Democratic Party, which of course was the party that was favorable towards Southern culture, Southern institutions. It was a slave state. Delaware, yes, a slave state. It only had 1,800 slaves by 1860. So it was the smallest slave state when it comes to numbers. But then again, it was also a very small state when it came to overall population. So 1,800, yeah, that's quite small. It's not entirely disproportionate compared to some of the other slave states when it comes to the percentages of overall state residents who are slave or free. Now, Delaware did vote for John C. Breckenridge in the Electoral College of the 1860 presidential election. Remember, John C. Breckenridge. We talked about that election in one of the previous lectures in this series. And John C. Breckenridge was the Southern Democrat. Remember, the Democratic Party had split into two, the Northern Democrats and the Southern Democrats. Right. Well, Delaware went for the Southern Democrat Party, an indication. But Breckenridge was very much pro-slavery and wanted slavery to permanently be preserved. That was Delaware's view as well. So Delaware is very much a southern state in 1860, 1861. What we need to do here is we need to break the state up by counties. Delaware back then, as is the case today, consists of 3 counties. And so we'll start by looking at the northernmost one, Newcastle County, which of course is named after the city of Newcastle, which is in the county of Northumberland over here in England. Now, Newcastle County had the principal city of Delaware, Wilmington. And Wilmington today is in a lot of ways pretty much a suburb of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Back then, didn't really do the whole suburban thing yet. However, it does not take away from the fact that Wilmington, Delaware's economy largely relied on the economy of Philadelphia. It was very much economically and commercially tied to Philadelphia. And it's not just because of the proximity to Philadelphia, it's also the fact that, well, what's the river that goes through Philadelphia? The Delaware River, okay? So, well, Wilmington is just down the Delaware River from Pennsylvania and specifically Philadelphia. So Philadelphia is in the very southeast corner of Pennsylvania, and it is one of the most crucial northern cities. And of course, if you go downstream, you end up in Delaware, a southern state. Now that there's a war between North and South is about to break out, that could be perilous for that very important city of Philadelphia. So the fate of Wilmington also could determine the fate of Philadelphia in the long term. Now, Newcastle County as a whole had a much larger population than the other 2 counties in Delaware at the time. So in 1860, the population of Newcastle was double that of the other two counties. I mean, it makes sense. It's the one that's further north. It's much more industrial, and it's close to Philadelphia. So because of these economic and commercial ties, Newcastle County, the majority was pro-North. And when Lincoln issued his call for volunteers in April of 1861, after the Confederates had been firing on Fort Sumter, Newcastle County does respond to that very proactively. And a lot of Union troops will be coming from Newcastle County, Delaware. Now let's take a look at Kent and Sussex counties. So these are the two southernmost counties in the state of Delaware. And this is the region that most looks like the American South. It is very marshy, and there are tobacco plantations and farms in these two counties. Not as many as there were prior to 1860, however. A lot of these farms had converted to fruit and veg farming by the eve of the Secession crisis, but it didn't change the overall culture of these two counties, nor their identities, and they do very much so identify very strongly as Southern. Kent and Sussex counties, when we get to April of 1861, do not respond to Lincoln's call for volunteers, an indication as to where their hearts lie. Now, a lot of historians have neglected the study of Delaware in regards to the Secession crisis and the American Civil War as a whole. And again, I think that's not a wise decision to make, because I think Delaware plays a very significant role in both. However, we need to take a look to see why some of the historians have overlooked Delaware as a significant game player in this whole conflict. And the reasons are actually rather obvious. Now, if you look at that map there on the right, you will see that that is actually a map of the current United States. I mean, it's even got Alaska and Hawaii in it. And a lot of these states there were not states in 1860, 1861. But I like this map because it shows exactly where Delaware is. It also shows how small it is geographically compared to the vast majority of American states. Now, of the southern border states, geographically, it is the smallest one in both geography and in population. It has less than 2,000 square miles, so it's really not that big. It's also got a tiny population compared to other states, 112,000 people. That's much smaller than Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. Now, looking at the big picture, where does Delaware sit with the entire American Union in 1860? It is actually the smallest state population-wise east of the Mississippi River. And that was something that was noted in Washington. Also, if you look at the whole big picture, east and west of what was the United States in 1861, there were only two states which were smaller in population than Delaware, and those were Oregon and Kansas. Well, Oregon has barely been settled. It became a state in the 1850s. And on top of that, unlike California, gold wasn't struck there in the 1840s, 1850s. So people didn't go there in huge numbers the way they did to California. And on top of that, so let's look at the Kansas situation. Well, Kansas just became a state in January of 1861. So it's barely a state at the time that we are in the Secession crisis. So Delaware, really, in the minds of most Americans and American politicians, is the smallest state during the Secession crisis. But we cannot overlook Delaware's importance in the Secession crisis or the war. And there's a reason that Delaware's nickname is the Diamond State. If you're the Diamond State, you must be worth something. And actually, it was Thomas Jefferson who coined the phrase at Delaware being the Diamond State. And he did that when he visited the state and he saw its location on the Atlantic Ocean right where the Delaware River came into Delaware Bay and the bay dumped into the ocean, realizing it was so crucial as a waterway and also potentially for defense of the very crucial revolutionary city of Philadelphia. Now, if you look on the left, you will see the city of Wilmington there. And that was, as I mentioned earlier, it was very much an industrial city. Now, we also need to talk about railways. Railways is another major reason as to why Lincoln cannot afford to lose Delaware. If Delaware secedes, he's in big trouble. So first of all, when it comes to railways, the railway line connecting Philadelphia and Washington went right through Delaware. If Delaware secedes, you risk losing that train line. It is absolutely vital for Lincoln that he secures that rail line, and that is why, after he becomes president, he is going to have the Union Army take that railroad. Not an army taking a railway. What that means is they're going to guard the hell out of it. They're going to make sure it is not threatened. They will oversee the running of it, and because it's so vital. And so if Lincoln is able to prevent Delaware from seceding, then that rail line, which is not long, it's a very short ride, quick one from Philadelphia to Washington, but it's absolutely vital. And the fact that it is so short is why it's so vital, because he can get troops and supplies very quickly from Philadelphia to Washington. And of course, if you keep Delaware in the Union, the industrial city of Wilmington also will be connected directly by rail line to Washington, and Lincoln can get supplies from there as well. And there are some very crucial supplies that Lincoln knows he can use in Wilmington should he manage to keep Delaware in the Union, especially Newcastle County. So let's look at those key industries. Pont, Gunpowder works, and DuPont's been around for a while now, but they are absolutely crucial. It's one of the largest gunpowder businesses in the country. And the DuPont Gunpowder Works, which is in Newcastle County and is headquartered in Wilmington, is going to end up producing half the gunpowder used by the Union armies throughout the American Civil War. That is incredibly significant. And that is why Abraham Lincoln, when he becomes president, he is going to get Union forces from Pennsylvania to occupy the gunpowder works there. Now that is significant as well. Notice that Mr. Lincoln is getting troops from Pennsylvania, firm Northerners. He's not going to get Delawareans to guard that gunpowder works. He doesn't trust them enough for that. So he is going to get what Lincoln sees as true Northerners to come down into Delaware and to occupy the DuPont Gunpowder Works, a strategy which will work out for him. It's not just gunpowder that you can get from Newcastle County. There's also a considerable number of large flour mills, the largest one being the Greenbank Mills. Well, flour is crucial for making bread, hardtack, and other food items for an army. Delaware, because of its proximity to Washington and the rail lines which connect to it, means that Newcastle County could be a very vital supply base for flour being used for the army. So again, there's a real risk of losing something vital should Delaware secede. And of course, if Delaware does secede, the Confederates could be the ones who benefit from these flour mills. And that's something Lincoln does not want. Finally, also in Newcastle County, you have Fort Delaware, which is situated in the middle of the Delaware River. It's an island fortification, like a lot of the mid-19th century forts in the United States at the time. And this fort was built to protect Wilmington and Philadelphia from a potential British invasion. Now, keep in mind, the Delaware River, yeah, it goes through Delaware, and it does go through Wilmington, but it goes further and all the way up to Philadelphia, at which point it's still very wide and very deep, and therefore it is the only artery, really, for the port of Philadelphia. And so Fort Delaware is absolutely vital if you want to use Philadelphia as part of this war effort. Now, when the secession crisis starts, there are some real concerns, and there's rumors that Marylanders, pro-secession Marylanders, were planning on coming into Delaware at night and taking over Fort Delaware, and therefore then handing it over to the Confederate forces to use. Therefore, once again, Lincoln is going to send Pennsylvania troops to occupy Fort Delaware. Again, he does not trust Delawarean Union soldiers to do that. So again, you can see Lincoln is playing his cards very carefully with Delaware, and very wisely, I should add. But you can see where he's drawn the line as far as who he can trust and who he does not feel confident of trusting at this point. So Fort Delaware is taken very quickly and is going to be put into in Union hands very firmly during that secession crisis. So let's take a look at the state level politics. We've got Governor William Burton. So obviously he's governor at the time. And he was born in Sussex County, but at a young age, he did move to Kent County in the town of Milford. That's where he grew up. So he is from the part of Delaware which very much identifies as Southern. But he goes to the University of Pennsylvania, UPenn, and he gets a medical degree there. So he also has some time living in Philadelphia, which is very much a northern city. So he's very familiar with Northerners as well. He gets on with them, but he's a Democrat, and he has been since 1848, when there wasn't much point in being a Whig anymore. He personally identified as a Southerner. Culturally, he favored the South. He was very much a supporter of the idea of state sovereignty over the federal government, and he was pro-slavery. He thought that slavery should be constitutionally protected within the United States permanently. He was not anti-secession, but he did not favor his home state of Delaware seceding. That is an important line in the sand that we're going to have to keep a very close eye on as we continue through this lecture. So let's look at the State General Assembly. They have a Democrat majority. They are incredibly anti-abolition. They are also, like the governor, in favor of the permanence of the protection of slavery where it exists in the United States. And they also are very open-minded towards listening to their fellow Southern states representatives who might wish to come up there and talk to them about the benefits of seceding. So you can understand why Lincoln is not, really trusting Delaware at this point as both the president-elect and as the president from March 1861. So let's take a look at the state's two senators. We'll start with James A. Baird, Jr. Now, Baird was born in Wilmington, Newcastle County, so the county which is more leaning towards the north culturally. And in spite of that, he is actually very pro-South. He is a Democrat. He does favor Delaware seceding from the American Union, although he tends to keep this to himself and amongst his closest political allies. But you can see in his letters, his papers, as well as those who were closely associated with him, that he was very much pro-secession. Publicly, he was willing to state that once the Confederate States of America was created, that the United States should let them go and recognize their sovereignty as an independent nation. So he was very public about that. And partly because of Baird, Lincoln required all United States senators in Washington to take an oath of allegiance to the American Union. Baird refused to do so, which is going to end up getting him into a bit of hot water with Lincoln, and we will be covering that in more detail later. The other senator is Willard Salisbury Sr. So he is born in Kent County, so one of the more southern-leaning counties. He is a Democrat, like Baird, and he is a graduate of Dickinson College and pursued a law degree from Delaware College. He was also a slave owner, an indication of where this is going to go. He was very critical of Abraham Lincoln and of the Republican Party, unsurprisingly. Now, when Lincoln suspended habeas corpus in Maryland in order to stop Maryland from seceding, Salisbury was very critical of the president publicly, which again did not sit well with the president. New Year's Day, 1861. 1861, a new year. So let's see what happened on this new day. Well, the state of Delaware had a visitor from Alabama. Actually, he's coming from Washington because although he's from Alabama, he is a member of the House of Representatives representing his home state up there. So David Clopton is who we're talking about here. Clopton had a meeting with Governor Burton in the state's capital city of Dover on New Year's Day, 1861. And in that meeting, he pushed the governor to endorse his home state's secession. Now, what's interesting here, this is New Year's Day, so the 1st of January, 1861. At this point, only South Carolina has seceded. Alabama has not yet seceded. So Alabama is still very much in the Union, and that's why Clopton is still actually a U.S. congressman. So it's important to understand that context here. But it also is a reminder and more evidence that it was a foregone conclusion that South Carolina wasn't going to be the only state that was going to secede. Now let's look at Clopton, what he said to Governor Burton. In that meeting, he said that the Republican Party, when they come into office in 2 months' time, in March 1861 is when the president took the inauguration back then, and he said that when the Republicans come into office, that they will push for an equality of races in our midst. Those are his exact words, an equality of races in our midst. And this was his way of lobbying Governor Burton into pushing for secession. And sure enough, 2 days later, there will be a state secession convention. And so the vote on secession was held on the 3rd of January of 1861. Now let's look at the context again here. All right, by this point, only South Carolina has seceded. And in spite of that, you have a judge who's come up from Mississippi, which is also still in the Union at this point, like Delaware, has not had their vote on secession yet. And Judge Henry Dickinson is telling the state's General Assembly that it is in their interest to secede. Now, the General Assembly did listen to him, but they did not act on his recommendations. And in fact, they voted unanimously to remain in the Union for now. Unanimous, now that is very different from some of the early votes that we saw. You'll remember that Virginia, for example, and also Tennessee and also North Carolina had all had secession conventions before the Fort Sumter attack, and they had all voted to remain in the Union. However, there was a sharp division in those 3 states. There were a lot of people in all 3 of those states who did vote for secession, who are members of their states' legislative branches. So it's very different with Delaware. It's unanimous in favor of staying in the Union. So a lot of people, again, that's part of why a lot of American Civil War historians brush over Delaware's, having any role in the secession crisis or even in the Civil War itself, as if they were of no consequence. But again, that is dangerous. And what I think is the problem is a lot of American Civil War historians are not aware of the fact that, again, if you look at the letters and papers of the members of the Delaware General Assembly, you will see that about half of them privately favored Delaware seceding and joining the Confederacy. So, although it was a unanimous vote to stay in the Union, a lot of them cast their vote in that direction, unsure really of what they wanted. And so the secession was very much still a risk at this point. We also know that Governor Thomas Hicks, the Maryland governor, he contacted the Delaware governor about the 2 states jointly seceding and creating what Governor Hicks referred to as a central confederacy that would be a union of the border states after seceding from the American Union. And that's interesting in a lot of ways. One is because it shows, again, that there was a real threat of Maryland seceding. that there was a real threat. And had Lincoln not acted the way he had, they might have gone. They very well might have gone. But what we need to remember here also is look at what Hicks is proposing, that the border states create their own nation, at least in the short term. That is an indication that these politicians, state level politicians in these border states, yes, identify as Southern. Yes, they're not happy with Lincoln becoming president, but that they do not see eye to eye with the fire eaters further south of where they are. And therefore, although they're thinking about the idea of getting out of the Union, they're not so sure that they're going to want to join up with states such as South Carolina, Mississippi, and Alabama. Now, Burton responded to Hicks and said that Delaware could not secede unless Virginia and Maryland seceded first. And again, think about where Delaware is on the map. That makes a lot of sense. If Delaware was to secede and Virginia and Maryland don't secede, then they would be completely cut off from the rest of the Confederacy, and that would also put them in a very awkward situation politically and militarily. Now, Virginia does secede. We already know that. Maryland does not secede. We know that as well. But at the time, we didn't know that. We didn't know that Maryland wasn't going to secede. Then, of course, Lincoln puts, imposes martial law there, suspends habeas corpus, and that seemed to keep Maryland in the Union. But if Maryland did not secede, how could Delaware secede, realistically? It just wouldn't be worth it. And I think Delaware's State General Assembly understood that. They recognized that. And that was a huge part as to why in January of 1861 they voted unanimously to stay in the Union. It would be suicide to leave the Union that early, that far north. But Burton also stated to Hicks that while the state's economic relations were very much with the North, he said, quote, a majority of our citizens, if not in all three of our counties, at least in the two lower ones, sympathize with the South. So look what he's saying there. He's basically admitting that, yes, Kent and Sussex counties do very much sympathize with the South, and also, to a large extent, the Confederate movement altogether. But he seems to think that there's a lot of support in Newcastle County as well. It's just a bit of a silent movement. Now, in June of 1861, the Delaware General Assembly will meet again to discuss secession, and they decide not to secede. Now, June 1861, at this point, Maryland's under martial law. Virginia has seceded. North Carolina, Tennessee, Arkansas, they've all seceded. But they don't go. But they do pass a resolution, and it states that whilst we deeply deplore the revolution which has severed 11 states from the Union, we prefer peace to civil war, and believe that if a reconciliation by peaceful means shall become impossible, the acknowledgement of the independence of the Confederate States is preferable to an attempt to conquer and hold them as subjugated provinces. Now, that is a powerful resolution which was voted on and adopted by the Delaware State General Assembly in June of 1861. So it shows that they favor the Confederates getting independence. And this is something no other state in the Union that stayed in the Union throughout the war did. No other state other than Delaware passed this resolution, but the fact that they do it shows that there is a lot of Confederacy. Now, the attitudes of the counties, let's go a little bit deeper there. So, unsurprisingly, the majority of Newcastle County, from what we've seen in our studies, show that they favored a war to preserve the Union. So, Newcastle County, the majority of those people there, they don't want to see the Union dissolved, and they think it's worth fighting for to save. But Kent and Sussex counties, further to the south, they very much favor the state not getting involved, not joining the Confederacy, but neutrality. And there's also a very common sentiment in Kent and Sussex counties that the Confederacy should be able to determine their own destiny, that they should not have to fight for independence. It should be honored. So again, so Newcastle County, there isn't, any real, secession attitude there. Both Kent and Sussex, it seems like their hearts are definitely with the South in this upcoming conflict, but they don't seem willing to fight for it themselves. They seem to want to support it verbally, but they don't want to fight for it themselves. Now, Delaware's contributions to this war. Now, this is very telling. 13,000 Delawareans will serve in the Union Army. Only 800 will serve in the Confederate Army. All of them will be in Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. So this is incredibly lopsided. And so this shows that Delaware, it shows evidence that Delaware was very much on the side of the Union in the Civil War. But you also have to keep in mind the fact that Delawareans who are pro-South felt it was very risky to outwardly show support for the Confederacy and, well, not answering a call for conscription because you're in Virginia and you're enlisted in Lee's army. How is that going to impact your family in Delaware? What will happen? And they don't know. And to them, it's just too dangerous. So a lot of them did just stay out. And that's part of why the number who fought for the South was so low. And that's part of why Delaware is going to be the only state which will not supply a single Confederate unit to any Confederate army. But that being said, the Army of Northern Virginia was more than willing to take those 800 extra men. And they did take them gladly. So to summarize things, let's look at what Abraham Lincoln says here about Delaware in the summer of 1861. It says, south of the Mason-Dixon line, noble little Delaware led off right from the first. And Lincoln's absolutely right. They did. They stayed neutral. They did not pose any threat to the Union. They voted to stay in the Union. They had that resolution saying that the South should be left alone, but they didn't act on it at all. And for Lincoln, that was good enough. And so he was quite pleased with Delaware's deciding to sort of stay on the side through the war. And he was happy to take those 13,000 soldiers into his armies from Delaware. So that is the end of the lecture. Thank you very much for watching. And again, if you have not clicked on subscribe yet, please do so. And that will definitely help me out. And it also will help make sure that we can continue with these lectures going in deeper into 1861. And we are hoping to make it all the way to 1865. A lot of content to cover. And believe me, we will cover it if we get enough support for it and there's enough desire for it. So please click on subscribe if you like this video. Please also tick the like button and please feel free to comment in any way that you wish. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye.